At almost 2 a.m, the penthouse felt like it was holding its breath. My hands smelled like lemon cleanser, and the marble under my palms was so cold it ached. I was halfway through wiping the kitchen island when the front lock turned with a sharp impatience that didn't belong to security or staff. Ethan Callahan walked in carrying the night on him. Harbor salt clung to his coat. Adrenaline tightened his posture like he'd just come off a sprint. On one cuff, a dark smear sat where clean white should have been. He was early. That single fact hit harder than the blood. In this home, schedules were rules, and rules were what kept people alive. I crossed the foyer before he could speak. Bare feet, soft rug, no wasted motion. I caught his wrist and pulled him into me, hard enough to surprise him. The impulse to ask why flashed in his face. Then the cold authority returned, the look that said everyone else moved and he didn't. I didn't give him the chance. I tightened my grip and pushed one thought straight into him with my eyes. Stay quiet. Not yet. He could have torn free. He could have raised his voice and turned the whole place into a spotlight. Instead, he froze. Because fear like mine doesn't happen for nothing. I guided him past the dining area and tucked him into the shadow beside the grand piano. From there, he could see down the hall without anyone seeing him. I knew that angle because I knew this house too well. I knew where the cameras didn't reach. I knew the timing of every door. I knew the security guard's coffee breaks, the nanny's sleep schedule, the elevator's quietest seconds. I knew which cabinet hid spare keys and which drawer held children's medicine. Nobody asked how I learned. They assumed I was invisible, and I always let them too. Ethan followed my line of sight. The playroom door was open a crack. Warm light leaked out, wrong in the middle of the night. Inside, Vanessa DeLuca stood perfectly composed, as if this were normal. Mason was 7, and rigid near the toy shelf, shoulders squared like he'd practiced being invisible. His eyes didn't move. Lily was 5 and trembling by the little table, hands held out in front of her the way you hold out something you don't want to lose. Her mouth formed words in a thin, broken rhythm, as if she'd been told to repeat them until they sounded true. I couldn't hear Vanessa from where we stood. She didn't need volume. A slight tilt of her head made Lily's chin dip lower. A small lift of her fingers made Mason's breath catch. No bruises, no shouting, just a quiet, deliberate lesson. You are small, and I decide what you are. Beside me, Ethan changed. His gaze went from distant and Mafia calm to something sharp enough to hurt. Rage hit him so fast I felt it like heat off his skin. His body leaned forward, instinct ready to storm the doorway and end it. I stepped into his path. I planted my palm on his chest, right over his heartbeat, and held him there. My other hand stayed locked on his wrist. For a second it felt insane. Me restraining a man built for command. A man with blood on his cuff and power in his name. But I knew the trap Vanessa had set, and I knew how easily she could flip it. If Ethan erupted, she'd call it instability. She'd call it an attack. She'd threaten the DeLuca alliance and paint herself as the protector of the children from their own father. In the wrong hands, the truth would become a weapon against him, and the kids would pay for it in private. Ethan's eyes cut to me, furious, demanding. I held on anyway, because I wasn't just a cleaner with tired hands. I was a single mom who'd learned what happens when adults turn pain into a contest. I was terrified, but my fear had a purpose. I could buy seconds. In the playroom, Lily's shoulders shook. She forced the last word out like it scraped her throat. Mason's fingers curled into a fist and then opened again, like he was trying to remember how not to fight back. Vanessa leaned closer, preparing to press the lesson deeper. Ethan's breathing went tight. I felt his muscles bunch under my hand. The whole penthouse narrowed down to this. His rage, my restraint. 2 children caught in a game they didn't understand. I leaned in until my cheek was near his shoulder, close enough to guide him without making a sound that could travel. I kept my eyes on the doorway and let him feel my grip tighten. A silent plea and a command at once. Then I shifted my gaze, not toward Vanessa, but toward the slim seam of cabinetry behind the piano, the hidden space I'd measured with my own hands. The place I'd started using because I needed somewhere to put what no one was supposed to find. This moment wasn't luck. I had been waiting for Ethan to come home early, because I had proof he needed to see before he acted, and if he moved before he saw it, Vanessa would win before the fight even started. I kept Ethan pinned in the shadow with my palm pressed to his chest. Not hard, just enough to tell his body to listen before it reacted. The penthouse was silent in that expensive way, like the air itself had been trained. In the playroom, Vanessa DeLuca moved with calm control. Mason stood too straight for a 7-year-old. Lily trembled in place, her face blank the way fear teaches kids to go blank. Ethan's eyes locked on them, and I felt him change, fast. The man who could walk in from the waterfront with blood on a cuff and never blink was suddenly only a father, full of rage with nowhere safe to put it. His muscles bunched like he was about to charge. I tightened my grip because Vanessa could weaponize any outburst. If he moved, she could flip the story, threaten the DeLuca alliance, and pain. The door clicked shut behind us, and the penthouse noise disappeared. In the hidden room, the monitors threw blue light across our faces. Mason stayed glued to Ethan's side, too still for a 7-year-old. Lily clung to Ethan's chest like she expected the floor to vanish. We were out of Vanessa DeLuca's sight, but the kids were still living in her rules. Ethan kept staring at me. Even holding both kids, he looked like a man deciding whether I was a rescue or a setup, father and boss at once. My hand hovered over the binders on the desk. Dates, labels, a timeline I'd built one night at a time. I had dragged him through a wall he didn't know existed, into a room he didn't know was here. And now I owed him the truth that made all of this worth it. I wasn't just a cleaner. Yes, my hands smelled like lemon cleanser. And yes, I knew every marble edge and every door that stuck. But I didn't come here for a paycheck. I came with intent. I learned routines, counted footsteps, watched Vanessa's patterns, mapped blind spots. I did it to survive long enough to finish what I started. For months, Ethan Callahan had been the monster in my head. Boston said his name like weather. Unavoidable, dangerous. Men like him made harm look legal. I told myself that story because it kept my fear sharp. Then I pulled a photo from the top folder and placed it under the monitor glow. A woman in an office cardigan, tired smile, pen behind her ear. Ordinary to anyone who hadn't loved her. My sister, Jessica Bennett. Her name didn't echo. It sank. I watched Ethan's eyes move over her face, searching. Something flickered. Not understanding. Just recognition. Like a hallway you once passed through. Jessica worked as an accountant, a bookkeeper tied to Ethan's legitimate businesses. Payroll, invoices, clean paper trails that helped powerful men pretend the world ran on order. She wasn't in the underworld. She was near it, which is another way of saying she was reachable. When she disappeared, the city called it a robbery. Random. Wrong place. Wrong time. A headline and a shrug. People offered prayers. Then the world moved on. But it was not random. The DeLuca family ordered it. Frank DeLuca, Vanessa's father, either gave the order or made sure it happened. Jessica was pushed for access, for information, for a door into something she didn't understand. When she couldn't give them what they wanted, they erased her and let everyone call it bad luck. I kept the details non-graphic because the worst part was never gore. The worst part was the aftermath, the call that split my life, the police indifference, the way strangers asked what she was doing out so late, like that question explained everything, the way grief turned into paperwork. I watched Ethan absorb it in real time. I could almost see his memory trying to reconstruct a file he'd misfiled. Condolences handled by an assistant, flowers sent, money quietly delivered, then the lid shut. A life reduced to a line item, not because he enjoyed it, but because his world taught him that forgetting is how you keep moving. That was the kind of monster I came here expecting. Then I spent 3 months inside his home and watched a different truth leak through the cracks. I saw the photo of Claire Callahan he kept where only his hand could find it. I saw the way he returned from the waterfront carrying exhaustion like a coat he couldn't take off. I saw him trying, in the few minutes he had, to be a father. And I saw what Mason and Lily did with his absence. Mason went rigid at footsteps. Lily learned to make herself small. They waited by the window when a car slowed outside. Those weren't spoiled kid habits. Those were survival skills. So yes, revenge lived in my bones. I came in ready to build a case against Ethan if I had to. I came in believing I might need to destroy him to get justice for Jessica. Then I watched Vanessa. I watched her use silence like a leash and fear like a bedtime routine. I watched her cruelty land with planning, not temper, and I realized the trap. If Ethan exploded first, Vanessa would twist the story, threaten the DeLuca alliance, and Frank would bury the truth the way he buried my sister. That's when my goal changed. My goal became Mason and Lily. My goal became making Vanessa pay with proof, not impulse, because impulse is what gets children hurt. I needed Ethan controlled long enough to do this right. We were aligned, not trusting. Ethan's gaze drifted from Jessica's photo to my binders, to the dates, to the quiet discipline of my work. He understood something without me saying it. While his security team swept for sensors and heat, I lived here and watched the human pattern. I slid my fingers to the second binder. thicker, tabbed like a legal war. Documents, signatures, an inheritance structure, dates circled in red. Vanessa's cruelty was only the surface. Under it was a plan designed to leave no trace, the kind of death that looks like an accident and turns into money by morning. And the deadline was close, too close for comfort. The hidden room was sealed tight behind us, but it still didn't feel safe. The monitors washed the concrete in a cold blue glow. Mason stood too still, eyes flicking from my hands to Ethan's face. Lily slept in Ethan's arms, yet even asleep she held her shoulders up like she expected someone to yank her awake. I didn't waste time. I opened the laptop and turned it toward Ethan. First, screenshots. Vanessa's search history, captured and dated. Poisons that mimic natural causes. No trace death. Heart failure that looks like stress. How to make someone fade without alarms. Ethan's grip tightened around Lily, careful not to wake her. His hand shook anyway. His breathing went hot, shallow, like his body wanted to explode and couldn't. I moved before he could. Next, a street photo of a Beacon Hill office with a brass plaque, an estate lawyer, then lobby footage. Vanessa DeLuca walking in at 2:15 in the afternoon, walking out less than an hour later with a thick folder tucked under her arm. I'd saved a still of her dropping a parking receipt into a trash can, like she was erasing the smallest trace of herself. Then I showed him the paperwork. An amended beneficiary form, a trust attachment, a will draft, Ethan's name typed clean, a signature at the bottom that looked like his and wasn't his. I had a photo of his real signature from an older document beside it. Close enough to fool someone who didn't want to look closely. Wrong enough to make my stomach twist. The language was brutally simple. If Ethan died, Vanessa inherited. If Mason and Lily died too, Vanessa became sole heir with no guardianship fight, no messy court questions, no delays. Ethan's eyes tracked the lines like he was reading his own funeral program. His face drained of color, then hardened. Power doesn't matter when the weapon is ink. Mason made a tiny inhale. Ethan flinched at it like he'd been hit. He pressed Lily closer, not possessive, just desperate. I opened the tab labeled Meetings. Penthouse lobby camera. Vanessa stepping into an elevator with two men who were not staff. One carried a slim hard case. The other moved like he didn't care about being seen. Waterfront sidewalk angle. Vanessa meeting Frank DeLuca outside a restaurant Ethan never used. Frank's posture said decision, not conversation. Beside him stood a heavy-set man with hands like stone. No smiles. No lingering. The kind of meeting that ends before anyone can overhear. Ethan's gaze snapped from the men on screen to Mason and back. His kids weren't just suffering. They were being handled. I opened the last file. Delivery. Service hallway footage. The elevator doors parting. A courier handing Vanessa a padded envelope. She signed and walked off like it was nothing. Later, kitchen camera. She opened it and slid a plastic sleeve onto the counter. Inside was an unlabeled vial and syringes sealed in sterile wrap. No pharmacy label, no brand. Nothing that belonged in a home with children. The clip jumped again. Vanessa held the vial up to the light, calm. Then she burned a small note over the stove flame, patient, watching it curl into ash. I kept my explanation plain, because the fear was already huge. Digitalis. I wasn't teaching anything. I was telling Ethan why this choice terrified me. It can start as symptoms people blame on exhaustion, anxiety, grief, the normal cracks in a man's life. And if it turns lethal, it can look natural enough that strangers accept it. Vanessa wanted a clean story, not a scene. The monitors hummed like a distant freeway. Somewhere above us, the penthouse was still breathing, pipes ticking, elevators sleeping. Mason's eyes never left the door. Lily's lashes fluttered once, then settled, trusting Ethan's arms even while her body stayed ready to flinch again. Ethan made a rough sound, like nausea, and rage collided. His eyes went wet and sharp at once. He looked down at Lily's face, then at Mason's rigid posture, and I saw it land. This wasn't about him losing control of his house. This was about his children being targeted like obstacles. I laid out what the file suggested, stitched together across 3 months and 90 days of watching her routines. Children first. Not loudly. Not in a way that would start a war. A staged accident. A fall. A bathtub story. A moment blamed on bad luck or a careless worker. Something that let Vanessa perform grief while keeping her hands clean. Then Ethan, slowly. Grief would be the cover. Stress would be the excuse. The city would watch him unravel and call it inevitable. Vanessa would stand beside him in public, the devoted wife, until the day she didn't have to pretend anymore. And Frank DeLuca, would absorb the empire without firing a shot. Paperwork, sympathy, a smooth transfer while everyone stayed polite. I slid a sticky note from the inside cover and turned it so Ethan could read my handwriting. Tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours. That was the deadline her planning kept circling. It matched the tone I'd overheard earlier, the soft certainty that the children would no longer be a problem soon. Ethan stared at the sealed door like he could see Vanessa sleeping on the other side, untouched. I felt the fork forming inside him. One path was war. Fast, brutal, loud. The other was disappearing, letting the empire go dark so Mason and Lily could stay alive. I didn't tell him what to do. I just watched his face tighten as he weighed what mattered more. Fight and risk losing them, or run and lose everything else. The fork in the road sat between us under the glow of the monitors. Ethan's attention kept snapping from the laptop to the hidden door, then to Mason's stiff little body, then to Lily's head on his shoulder. I could feel the empire builder in him reaching for the fastest answer. Call his crew. Flood the penthouse with armed loyalty. Turn the night into a war. But war was exactly what Vanessa's plan fed on. Noise, confusion, stray angles nobody can control. She didn't need to beat Ethan in a street fight. She needed him to make one mistake while she stayed clean, grieving, believable. Mason stood at my side, 7 years old and already built for silence. He barely blinked. Lily slept like a child who had learned there was no safe way to wake up. I looked at the proof again, not because I needed it, but because Ethan did. The dates, the file labels, the words tomorrow night I'd written on a sticky note as if ink could hold off fate. Less than 24 hours. A plan meant to look natural. A plan designed so the kids would be gone before anyone could argue. The line landed in me like a verdict. If he stayed, he would lose them. Not because he lacked guns or men, but because a war makes children into targets and accidents into headlines. Vanessa would use the chaos to finish what she'd started. Ethan tried to be stone. I watched him swallow, watched his jaw tighten, watched his hand hover near his phone and then stop. His gaze kept returning to Mason and Lily like they were the only two things that were real. The nausea showed in a blink that lasted too long, in a breath that turned harsh, in the way his shoulders sagged a fraction as he realized he could not outgun paper, poison, and optics while holding a child. Then he made a choice I didn't expect from a man like him. He drew his handgun with careful slowness and set it down on the workbench beside the keyboard. Metal touched wood with a soft final click. It wasn't weakness. It was a father choosing a different language. My throat tightened. I thought of Jessica, my sister, and how men like Frank DeLuca treated violence like a signature. Ethan's hands shook anyway, but he didn't reach for the gun again. I opened the drawer I'd stocked in secret, because planning is the only kind of mercy I know how to offer. First, a plain keyring and the key to a nobody car. An old sedan I'd chosen for one reason. It looked like everything else. No luxury, no pattern. Then an envelope of emergency cash. Then a burner phone sealed in plastic, with no history and no names attached. And the IDs. Basic, imperfect, built in layers. A new name for me, a different last name for the kids, a cover story that could survive a tired clerk. I told him about the safe place without painting it like a dream. A small town west of Boston. A short-term rental paid in cash under a dull identity. The kind of place no one searches first because it isn't glamorous enough to matter. Ethan stared at his own phone like it was a heartbeat he'd been living off. Around 3:47 in the morning, the building felt too quiet, as if it was listening. Ethan powered his phone off. He popped the case with his thumbnail, slid the SIM out, and dropped it into my palm. Then he set the device down beside the gun and left it there. That was the bridge burning. No crew, no instant war, no old life waiting on the other end of a signal. I'd watched Vanessa for 3 months, watched how she waited until Ethan was at the waterfront, watched how she rehearsed tenderness for cameras and cruelty for closed doors. She always checked the kids at 3 in the morning, like she was counting her inventory. I imagined her phone lighting up with Ethan's name soon, and him refusing to answer, letting it die in silence without looking back. Mason shifted closer to Ethan without a sound. He reached for Ethan's hand like it was a rope. Ethan took it immediately. Lily stayed in Ethan's arms, limp with sleep, her cheek pressed to his chest. I led them back into the hidden passage. Cold air rolled over us. The corridor swallowed sound. My fingers found the latch points by memory, my mind counting seconds like prayer. We descended into the lower levels, and the garage smell hit us. Oil and concrete and winter air leaking under the door. Exit lights washed everything pale. I guided them toward the nobody car, toward the first honest chance to be unseen. And then I noticed a detail that didn't belong. A sedan 2 spots over sat angled toward the ramp, positioned like it was ready to follow. The engine was off, but the hood held a faint warmth in the cold garage. No dust on the windshield. No salt ring on the tires. Someone had been here, recently. I kept walking, kept my face calm for the kids, but inside I felt the invisible thread tightening behind us. We were leaving the penthouse, and the DeLucas might already be on our tail. I knew we were being watched before I could prove it. The nobody car rolled out of the garage and into the streets, heater weak, glass fogging. Ethan sat beside me with Lily folded against his chest. Mason was behind them, rigid and quiet, watching like sound could cost him. The first sign was a pair of headlights that stayed too steady. Not close enough to be rude, not far enough to be random. When I turned right toward the on-ramp, the lights turned right too. I told myself it was a commuter. Then I changed lanes early, the kind of lane change that makes no sense unless you are avoiding something. The headlights drifted with me, smooth as breath, and a second set appeared a block behind them, higher off the ground, SUV height. 2 dark SUVs in a line at this hour did not belong on this stretch. They held distance like a rule. I did not announce the tail. I let it sit in my posture, in the way my shoulders locked, in the way my eyes kept flicking to the mirror. Ethan read it anyway. His body shifted toward old instincts, the ones that solve problems with force. But we had already chosen a different language: survival, invisibility. My mind raced through grounded reasons they found us anyway. A tracker under the bumper, a tag slipped into a bag, something stuck to a coat or shoe, or simply a predictable route out of the city that anyone with money and malice would guess. Ethan had abandoned his phone, but the kids had backpacks and soft things that could hide hard little dots. The DeLucas did not need magic. They needed patience. The nobody car bought us seconds, not safety. Ethan's usual cars were too perfect, too specific. This one looked like every tired sedan in Boston, but the DeLucas were hunting people. Mason leaned forward between the seats, small shoulders tense, gaze flicking to the mirrors and then to Lily like he was trying to shield her with attention. Lily made a tiny sound against Ethan's coat, the beginning of a cry she swallowed. Ethan's hand covered her seatbelt strap. He kept his breathing quiet, like he was matching the children so they would not feel how scared he was. I made a test turn onto a side street lined with warehouses and closed loading docks. The SUVs followed without hesitation. I turned again, then again, a little zigzag that a normal driver would never do unless lost. They stayed with us, headlights dimmed, distance perfect. My skin went cold. No reckless stunts, just chess moves. 2 blocks ahead, a parking structure sat half-lit beside a shuttered market, full of blind corners. I guided the car in as if I belonged there, as if I was meeting someone at dawn. Inside, the concrete swallowed sound. The wipers ticked once and I shut them off. I climbed to the 2nd level, then the 3rd, passing empty spaces and a camera that faced the entrance, not the back corners. I chose a spot behind a thick column near a stairwell door, where shadows stayed deeper. I killed the lights, then the engine. The sudden silence felt like stepping off a cliff. Breath fogged the glass. Mason held his breath like it was a skill. Lily's fingers clenched in Ethan's coat, shaking. I could hear my heartbeat in my teeth. Ethan stayed still, one arm around Lily, the other braced against his own knee. The SUVs entered the structure moments later. Engines idled low, a heavy purr vibrating through the concrete. Headlights swept across rows of empty cars. I watched light slide over the floor like a search beam. Stop, then move again. The first SUV rolled past our row, slow and deliberate. The second followed, tires crunching faint grit, a sound so small it still made me flinch. For a few beats, they were close enough that I could smell exhaust through the vents. In the dark, my mind flashed to the phrase I had caught on one of my recordings, the cold promise that the children would no longer be a problem. That memory climbed my spine like ice. If they found us, there would be no drama, just hands opening doors. A needle, a story for the papers. The SUVs passed. Their lights swept the far corner, then turned toward the ramp, as if they had decided we went another way. Engines rose slightly, then faded. I did not move. I held the stillness longer than comfort because near misses only stay near if you respect them. When the last sound softened into distance, I let myself breathe again, slow and careful. Ethan's shoulder dropped a fraction. Mason finally blinked. Lily's grip loosened, but she did not wake. We waited 5 minutes, then 10. The sky outside shifted from black to bruised gray. Close to 5:30 in the morning, I restarted the engine and kept the lights off until we reached the exit. Then I eased onto the road and pointed us north, out of Boston, toward the safe place I picked because no one would look there first. We had shaken the tail once. It did not feel like winning. It felt like proof the DeLucas were already moving, already hunting, already built like a machine. And machines do not get tired. Dawn trailed us like a witness who didn't want to testify. The sky went from black to a thin gray as we crossed out of Massachusetts, and the road signs stopped sounding like a waterfront city and started sounding like places where nobody ever makes the news. Close to 5:30 in the morning, my eyes burned, my shoulders ached. The town looked almost offensively normal. Clipped lawns, quiet streets, porch lights still on because someone fell asleep watching a late movie. The safe house was a modest cape, faded shutters, a driveway just big enough for one car, a mailbox leaning like it had survived a few winters and never cared. No gate, no guard, no luxury, just anonymity, which was the only kind of protection I trusted. I killed the engine and listened. Habit, trauma. The silence was so clean it made me suspicious. No tire hum circling back. No door slam. Ethan carried Lily up the steps, her head heavy on his shoulder, her hands still curled like she was holding on to sleep before it could be taken. Mason followed, too quiet, eyes flicking to every parked car like he was collecting threats. I locked the door behind us and felt my hand shake hard enough to scrape the key. Warm air wrapped around us. Real heat. A cheap lamp clicked on. The living room was plain. A second-hand couch, a throw blanket folded into a square, a coffee table with a coaster that said Maine. Ordinary objects, and tonight they felt like a miracle. The kitchen confirmed what my gut already knew. This wasn't improvised. The fridge held milk and eggs with fresh dates. There were apples, kid juice, and frozen waffles. A cabinet had cereal, peanut butter, crackers, and a jar of jelly. In a closet, I found toothbrushes still in plastic, clean towels, and a stack of cheap pajamas in kids' sizes. Someone had thought about small bodies and small needs. Relief, because it meant we could breathe for a minute. Fear, because it meant hands had stalked this place without leaving fingerprints, and I didn't know whose hands they were. My body still didn't relax. I checked windows. I checked locks. I checked the back door twice. Every small sound made me flinch. The heater clicking, the fridge humming. Even here, I kept hearing the Boston penthouse in my head. The piano silence, the disciplined breaths, the swallowed sobs too. Mason hovered at the bedroom threshold when I guided them down the hall. He waited until Lily was on the bed before he climbed up beside her. Half sitting, half guarding, 7 years old and already doing watch duty. My throat tightened with rage that had nowhere to go. Lily's exhaustion cracked when I pulled the blanket over her. Her eyes found mine with that too-old fear. I heard her question without needing her to push it into words, the simple terror of whether the bad woman would find us anyway. It was unfair that a 5-year-old knew how to ask that, so I gave her what I could. I brought water. I placed a cracker on a napkin. I clicked a nightlight on, soft and steady. I smoothed her hair back with my fingers, slow enough to tell her body it was safe to stop bracing. For a moment, her breathing changed. Mason's shoulders lowered a fraction, like his muscles finally gave up the fight for a few minutes. When I eased the door mostly shut, I turned and found Ethan in the hallway, staring at the wood like it might betray us. In Boston, he wore control like armor. Here, in a borrowed house with cheap lamps, the armor had cracks. His hands shook slightly, not from cold, but from aftershock. His gaze kept snapping to the bedroom door, like he needed proof the children were still real. I didn't soften into comfort. I didn't pretend tenderness erased consequences. I watched him sit with the weight of his own blindness, and for the first time I let myself see the father under the empire. He had built power, and still failed at the only job that mattered. He was also the man who had once let my sister's name become paperwork. We sat at the kitchen table with stale coffee waiting in the pot. The house was quiet except for the heater and the faint rhythm of kids settling into sleep. Ethan looked past me, eyes unfocused, like his mind was replaying every moment he'd trusted the wrong person. And inside my chest, the countdown kept ticking. Tomorrow night. Less than 24 hours. The phrase I'd recorded about the children no longer being a problem returned like ice pressed to my spine. This calm was a pause, not a verdict. Vanessa and Frank DeLuca were not going to shrug and move on. They were going to hunt for the missing pieces until they found them. That was when my trust shifted. Not into romance, not into softness, but into alignment. Ethan wasn't the danger in this house. He was the reason the danger existed, and also the only person who could end it without turning Mason and Lily into collateral. I kept my boundaries. I kept my realism. but the mission became ours. I pulled my phone closer and felt the next step rising like nausea. Evidence and hiding weren't enough. Running alone wasn't enough. We needed daylight leverage, outside hands, someone who could make documents and poison plans matter in a courtroom instead of a whisper. As the first real sleep settled behind that door, I understood the calm was already ending. The next sound we made had to be a call. Early afternoon felt like a borrowed coat. The safe house was modest, beige carpet, a small kitchen, curtains that belonged to some other life. Outside, the neighborhood moved like nothing was wrong. Even with daylight on the windows, my body stayed tuned to danger. Mason and Lily had slept after dawn, the kind of sleep that comes from spending your whole body on fear. When they woke, they didn't bounce. They drifted. Mason stayed close to his sister, eyes scanning corners. Lily clung to whatever sleeve she could reach. Ethan Cross stood at the counter making peanut butter sandwiches, as if the simplest task could anchor him. His shoulders were still tight, but his hands were careful. He let Mason help, and he held Lily when she leaned into him. That ordinary picture hit me hard. Tomorrow night sat in my head like a stone. Less than 24 hours left, and Vanessa's plan wasn't a gunfight. It was paperwork and a clean vial, and a story the public would accept. Ethan could call his crew and start a war, but a war makes chaos. Chaos makes accidents. And Mason and Lily were exactly the kind of accident the DeLucas would call fate. So I did the only thing that steadied me. I organized. I cleared the kitchen table and laid out what I'd gathered like it was a bridge we had to cross. Videos first, labeled by date, because time turns cruelty into proof. Screenshots of search history, messages, and the estate lawyer appointment. Photos of amended documents that slid the future into Vanessa's hands if Ethan and the kids died. The delivery clip, the small package, the unlabeled vial, the syringes, the way Vanessa burned a note without hesitation. Simple labels on paper, day 12, day 44, day 90. Ethan watched from the doorway. Pride tried to stand up in him, and guilt kept knocking it down. His eyes snapped to the kids, then back to my stacks, like he was seeing his own home through a new lens. His personal phone buzzed in his pocket. Once, twice. I didn't see the screen, but I felt Vanessa reaching for control. Ethan's hand hovered near the device, then pulled away. He powered it off slowly, and the small click felt louder than it should have. Then he picked up the burner phone I'd set near the evidence. It looked cheap in his hand, but it was the only safe truth we had left. He stared at it for a long beat. I could see the fork inside him. One path led back to Boston, to muscle and retaliation and bodies. The other led into rules, consequences, and protection that didn't depend on fear. He chose the second path. He dialed a number from memory. The ring sounded too loud in the quiet kitchen. When someone answered, Ethan kept his voice low and controlled. He gave enough history to be believed, and the name on the other end landed in my mind like a door opening. Daniel Mercer, a federal investigator Ethan once knew. Ethan didn't ask for rescue. He offered a trade, cooperation and testimony, plus every file I'd collected, and everything he could add from inside his own operations. In exchange, he demanded protection for Mason and Lily, and a lawful takedown that hit the DeLuca leadership instead of sparking a street war. I watched his throat tighten as he said it. Power is easy, accountability costs. Daniel Mercer didn't give comfort. He gave conditions. He needed 48 hours to verify evidence and coordinate the right people, the kind of move that collapses a network instead of grabbing one villain and leaving the machine running. He warned that pulling us out immediately could tip the DeLucas and trigger the exact ending we feared. Until the operation was ready, we had to stay invisible, follow strict rules, and live like ghosts. Then his questions turned toward me. Who was I? What was my role? What would I sign? Ethan made it clear I was the reason his children were still breathing. Daniel's answer was blunt. If I handed over what I had and stayed available, I'd be protected as a witness and helper, but protection came with scrutiny and boundaries. I saw Mason in the hallway, standing without a sound, holding Lily's hand. They weren't supposed to hear, but kids like them always hear. Mason's face tightened with grown-up fear. Lily stared at the phone like it could bite. I guided them back toward the living room, kept my movements calm, and focused on what they could feel instead of what they couldn't understand. Warm house, food, a blanket. When Ethan ended the call, the room felt sharper. Not safe, alert. Still, the choice felt heavy. I could almost hear the DeLuca machine adjusting, people checking logs, calling favors, tracing the last clean thread back to us. In that silence, I knew 48 hours wasn't a wait. It was a survival test, starting right now, today. 48 hours sounded like a plan until I measured it against tomorrow night. I packed the evidence into a bag and set the burner phone on the table like it was both hope and a warning. We had chosen the light, and now the waiting would test whether this little house could hold against a machine that had already started moving. Right around 6 in the evening, the safe house started to feel wrong. The neighborhood should have been settling into dinner noise. Instead, it went thin and quiet. The first signs were small enough to doubt. A car passed the house too slowly, then came back the other direction a few minutes later. My burner phone lost signal for a breath and didn't recover. The lamp over the sink flickered once. A dog 2 doors down that had barked all morning went silent. I stood at the window without letting my face catch the glass. Across the street, a man in a dark hoodie pretended to scroll his phone while his body angled toward our driveway. Down the block, a second figure lingered near a utility box, too still, too patient. Farther off, an engine idled. Ethan saw it on my face. He didn't ask. He switched into that calm, controlled version of himself that meant danger was already close. He set down the cup he was rinsing. He turned off the kitchen light. He pulled the go bag from the coat closet and checked it fast. Keys, cash, spare clothes for the kids, the small drive with my files. My fingertips went numb. Mason sat at the table with a pencil in his hand, shoulders tight. He was pretending to draw, but he was really listening. Lily curled under a blanket, exhausted and frightened, eyes too wide. When Ethan lifted her, she made a small sound that tried to become a cry, then swallowed it like she'd been trained. I guided them toward the back of the house, toward the utility door that led to the narrow yard and the detached garage. We had mapped this route. I had counted steps. I had found the boards that squeaked. Gravel shifted along the side path. Not running footsteps, careful ones. Then a soft scrape at the front window, like suction, like someone testing a small camera against glass. That was when I understood the twist. This wasn't random street muscle. This was organized, surgical, which meant they hadn't guessed. They had followed something. A plate number from the first car, a receipt, a device ping, a tracker stuck under a seat. One mistake, even an accidental one, and the DeLucas didn't need a gunfight. They just needed patience. Ethan cracked the utility door and listened. Then he moved us out in one tight cluster. Bodies close, breath held. He carried Lily. Mason stayed rigid beside him, one hand gripping Lily's blanket like it was a rope. The garage was dark and smelled like oil. Under a tarp waited the second vehicle I had insisted on, a battered work van, forgettable shape, not Ethan's world of black luxury. This thing bought seconds, not safety, but seconds were everything. 2 cars had brought us here. 1 van had to get us out. We climbed in without slamming anything. Ethan buckled Lily in the back with hands that held steady. Mason slid beside her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, eyes locked on the rear windows. I took the driver's seat and didn't start the engine yet. Headlights swept across the garage door. My throat closed. The light paused, then angled as if whoever was outside had lined up with the door seam. A thump hit the wall. Not a crash. A test. Ethan's hand drifted toward his waistband, then stopped. Whatever violence lived in him, he kept it caged because of the deal we'd made. He pulled Lily's blanket higher instead, shielding her face from the window. I did the small, decisive thing that saved us. I slid the outer go bag out of the van, pushed it through a loose vent panel, and let it drop onto the gravel outside. The sound was real. Then I nudged it so it scraped, like something fleeing. The beam snapped away from the garage door and jerked toward the yard. A shadow moved. Their attention shifted, just enough. I turned the key once. The van coughed, caught, and settled into an idle. I waited for their focus to stay pointed away, then eased the garage door up only as far as it needed to go. I rolled out slow and ordinary, like a neighbor leaving for a late shift. We made it past the first intersection before I let myself breathe. Ethan lifted the burner phone and called Daniel Mercer again, the law side contact who had agreed to meet darkness with warrants instead of bullets. I couldn't hear Daniel's exact words, but I felt the shape of them in Ethan's posture. Stay invisible, do not engage, do not lead them to the kids. Extraction was not ready. We had to reach the interim location now. 48 hours had been the plan. Tonight was the test. In the mirror, a pair of headlights appeared 2 blocks back, then vanished behind a turn. Mason pressed his forehead to the glass, watching like a grown man trapped in a child's body. Lily trembled under her blanket, tears sliding down without sound. Ethan stared ahead, jaw locked, choosing restraint like it was a wound. I kept driving as the sky darkened, hands steady, heart screaming again, and one question chewing through me harder than fear. If they found us this fast, what rule did we break without realizing it, and who else already knew where we were going? A little after 7 at night, we reached the interim place and locked ourselves inside it. It was a bare rental above a closed print shop. One old space heater clicked like a nervous metronome. When Ethan slid the deadbolt home, my body finally remembered it was allowed to tremble. The shaking came late. My hands went numb as I set the go-bag down. Mason and Lily folded fast. Mason tried to stay upright because he has been practicing bravery for too long, but exhaustion won. He curled on the couch with his sneakers still on, one arm hooked over Lily like a seatbelt. Lily melted into him, breath catching once, twice, then easing into sleep. For them, quiet was training. I, Mia Bennett, did the math without paper. 2 kids. One mistake, one door opening at the wrong time. A whole life erased. Ethan Cross moved through the room in controlled silence, checking the window, setting the burner phone and the evidence drive on the folding table, scanning corners like corners could bite. The confession started because the old half-truths couldn't survive in that small room. It began when his personal phone lit up in his pocket, and he didn't answer. I saw the reflex in his jaw, the habit of command, and then I saw him refuse it. It deepened when I caught him packing a second bag like he might leave to draw danger away from us. And it snapped into place when I looked at him with the wordless accusation I'd been carrying since Boston, the one that asked how a man can control a city and still fail to protect his own children. He sat at the table, palms open, and let the truth come out without performance. He confirmed what his empire really was: clean businesses on the surface, money that moved in ways no ledger could confess, favors that turned into debt, debt that turned into fear, fear that turned into obedience. He admitted he used fear as a tool because it worked, because it kept people in line. Then he admitted what it cost him, the part of himself that shrank every time he chose efficiency over mercy. He told me where it started. He grew up watching law fail people like him. A family member lost everything to a deal that was legal and still lethal. He learned early that paperwork can ruin you as cleanly as violence. So he built power, and once he had it, he was terrified to loosen his grip. Then he connected tonight to the past in a way that made my skin go cold. Frank DeLuca wasn't a new storm. He was an old consequence, waiting, collecting interest, watching for a weeknight. Ethan had made choices years ago that kept his world standing and planted seeds for this kind of revenge. The breach at the safe house felt like payment coming due. I needed to understand what I was tied to, and I hated what I understood. Part of me wanted him to be simpler. Another part remembered my own life, how control can hide behind legal language and clean signatures. Then clarity landed, hard and maternal, because Mason and Lily were asleep 10 feet away and my only job was to keep them breathing. I held gratitude and revulsion in the same hands. Both were true. Then the second twist landed, quiet and brutal. Ethan hadn't noticed me by accident when my own life started collapsing. He had noticed me earlier than I knew was possible. A fixer brought him a file on a woman trying to leave a legal trap, a mother with no money and a man tightening the screws. Ethan recognized the pattern because he had paid people to build patterns like that in other lives. He hated the recognition enough to act on it. He watched from a distance. He put someone on my ex. He chose a moment to intervene when he believed the trap was about to close. It wasn't fate. It was a decision. The room felt smaller, like my choices had always been inside someone else's reach, and I refused to let that be true again. I set terms, full transparency about immediate threats. No using the kids as leverage, ever. An exit option for me that is real, not symbolic, with no retaliation if I choose it. A plan that doesn't turn me into a criminal, because I will not trade one cage for another. He accepted in action, not speeches. He slid the burner phone and the drive closer to me, like he was handing over the steering wheel. He kept distance, hands visible. He explained the pressure from Daniel Mercer. 48 hours to verify and coordinate. No extraction yet without tipping the DeLucas. Stay invisible. Become ghosts. Cooperating meant Ethan could lose everything he built, and he didn't pretend otherwise. When Mason shifted in sleep and Lily made a tiny sound, Ethan rose slowly, careful not to loom. He checked on them like a man learning a new language, and I saw restraint in him that looked chosen. Even then, one question would not loosen. How did they find us tonight? We followed the rules. Mostly. The DeLucas moved like a machine, not like luck. Somebody had a line into our path, a leak, a ping, a familiar face. I watched my sleeping children, then watched Ethan, and I felt the bruised shape of betrayal forming under the plan. Tonight proved the hunt was real, faster than rules. The clock was tightening inside the clock, and I knew Part 12 would force a final strategy before the dark collected what it came for. A little after 8 at night, the lamp on the table buzzed. Lily's small shoes were lined by the door as I'd set them when we came in, as if order could keep the dark outside. Mason and Lily slept in the back room, or something close to it. Mason had placed himself between Lily and the wall, his arm curved around her like a fence. Their breathing was the only steady thing in the building. The burner phone vibrated. Daniel Mercer, Ethan's law-side contact. The one person Ethan trusted enough to call without pretending he was innocent. Mercer's update arrived as instruction, and I felt it like a closing fist. The 48-hour window was tightening. The DeLuca money was moving, and tomorrow night was no longer just Vanessa's threat. Mercer couldn't pull us out yet without tipping the enemy. He could move if we gave him something that held up in court and happened fast. Doing nothing, I understood, was a choice too. It was the choice that got kids erased quietly. So I went cold, because cold is how you count. I replayed the breach at the safe house, and the pattern finally stopped hiding. We followed the rules. No stores, no calls, no familiar routes. The only variable was the one person Ethan allowed near us, because he had been useful for years. Ray Donnelly, a fixer with apologetic eyes. Ray had been our only exception after Mercer's call. He insisted on dropping supplies himself. He lingered at the driveway like he was measuring sightlines. His gaze kept returning to the road. Tonight I let myself believe the simpler thing. He was selling us. Ethan didn't argue. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a flash drive. On it were clipped burner calls, a short transfer trail, and garage footage Ethan still had access to. Ray meeting 2 men beside a dark SUV. An envelope, a timestamp that matched the hour our safe house address became a target. The leak was proved. Mercer didn't need fury. He needed evidence that could survive daylight. The plan snapped into place. Mercer would set a controlled meet at the print shop loading dock below us, a dead-looking place with cameras and clean sightlines. Ethan would message Ray through the same compromised chain, offering safety in exchange for silence. Ray would come to finish what he started. If the DeLuca network was tied to him, it would show itself by arriving close enough to be seen. My role was to be the witness who chose when to step into the light. I bundled my 12 recordings and the forged papers into one packet, labeled by date. My hands shook, but they worked. Ethan carried Lily downstairs. She curled into him, exhausted beyond tears. Mason walked beside me, silent and rigid, eyes tracking corners like he'd been trained to survive. Ray arrived on foot, too calm for a man doing a favor. He started talking, and I didn't need every word to hear the lie. He framed betrayal as protection. He framed children as obstacles. Then Ray stepped closer, his hand dipped toward his waistband. Ethan's jacket shifted, and I knew where the gun was. I knew how fast Ethan could end a threat. I also knew what it would teach Mason and Lily if we solved fear with violence. My fingers brushed cold metal, and my mind flashed to Mason's rigid posture in the playroom, to Lily trembling into herself, to the phrase that had haunted me since Boston. The children will no longer be a problem. If I picked up the gun, I wasn't protecting them. I was teaching them that fear is a language you speak with a weapon. So I made one choice that belonged to me. I let my hand fall away. I stepped back, putting my body between the kids and the men, and lifted the evidence packet where Mercer's camera could see it. I gave Ethan the boundary I needed him to honor. Restraint was the promise, and consent was the line. Ethan honored it. I watched him exhale slow, keep his hands open, and choose containment over control. Mercer's team moved in like procedure. Lights flared. Exits closed. Ray froze. The SUV that had been holding distance tried to roll, and an unmarked car cut it off. No shootout, just cuffs, seized phones, and men who suddenly couldn't hide behind family names. Afterward, the damage happened the way clean criminals fear most. Warrants, frozen accounts, a prosecutor's signature. Frank DeLuca's plan to steal an empire through quiet deaths hit something quieter and stronger. Proof. Back upstairs. I sat on the floor beside Mason and Lily and listened to their breathing until my own matched it. Relief came, but it carried residue, like smoke you can't scrub out. Ethan wasn't suddenly clean. I wasn't suddenly safe. But the direction changed. I chose a process. I chose truth over secrecy. I chose a future where my children don't grow up breathing lies. If you're listening and you've ever stood in a moment where fear tried to make your choice for you, remember this. You can put the gun down. Even if the gun is only a symbol, you can make one choice yours. And if this story hits something in you, please like, share, and comment the one choice you made that saved you. Early winter light slid through the blinds of our rented house and turned the kitchen gold. The coffee maker sputtered like it was clearing its throat, and the smell that rose was a little burnt. A half-torn piece of holiday wrapping paper still sat on the counter because Mason insisted it could be saved, like tape and patience could make anything whole again. One of his socks lay abandoned near the heater vent, warm at the edges. I stood there with my mug warming my palms, listening for a threat that never arrived. Half a year later, calm still feels unreal, like I'm borrowing someone else's life. We live under new names that don't fit my mouth the way my old one did. The kids learned them fast, because children learn what keeps them alive. I learned mine slower, because it meant accepting that Mia Bennett is a person the world can find. This version of me stays tucked behind paperwork and routine. We keep rails under everything. School drop-off at 7:15 in the morning, groceries on Tuesdays, laundry on Fridays, always the same gas station, always the same route home, no social media, no photos with landmarks, no casual check-ins. Mason is enrolled under a legal arrangement that keeps his records quiet. Lily has a new pediatrician who doesn't ask questions she doesn't need to ask. Our mail goes through a box that isn't tied to our address. I know which neighbor leaves early and which porch light flickers, not because I want to be paranoid, but because I'm done being surprised. The aftermath landed the way thunder lands. Not one strike, but a long roll of consequences. The leverage plan worked. Warrants came down. Accounts froze. People who used to move like gravity had to sit under fluorescent lights and answer questions they couldn't buy their way out of. The DeLuca network didn't vanish, but it cracked wide enough for daylight to get in, and that daylight brought arrests, charges, and reputations collapsing. The leak that nearly got us killed was handled quietly and decisively, the way you remove rot so it can't spread. I didn't get a movie ending. I got nights where the door locks properly and stays locked. I was treated like a witness with dignity, not bait, and not an accessory. That still surprises me. Paperwork, testimony, and patient pressure did what bullets would have made messy. It didn't erase the harm. It stopped it from multiplying. Ethan Callahan's empire took a hit publicly. Headlines love a fall. But privately it stabilized, not because he fought louder, but because he got quieter. He shifted strategy to reduce chaos, not increase it. He honored the rules we set, and he honored them in actions, not speeches. I wish that meant my body forgot. It didn't. Some mornings, a car door shutting across the street makes my pulse jump. A knock can turn my stomach into water. I still check windows. I still scan reflections in dark glass. There are nights when fear shows up with no warning, and I count breaths until my thoughts lose their sharp edges. Healing isn't a straight line. It is 100 small decisions to come back to your own skin. Mason has nightmares less often now, but when he does, he wakes sitting upright, eyes open, trying to be silent even in terror. Lily's fear is different. She clings, then lets go, then checks to see if letting go was allowed. One night she asked me, in the simple way only a 5-year-old can, whether the bad woman could find us. I told her we built a place where people don't know our names, we don't open the door to strangers, and we stay together. I didn't promise forever. I promised effort. Ethan and I are not a fairy tale. We are a consent-based partnership with rules, and the rules are what make it real. Financial independence, so comfort never becomes a leash. Shared decisions about the kids, so protection doesn't turn into ownership. An exit option, always, written down and kept current, so leaving is a right, not a betrayal. No secrecy about threats that involve us. If danger comes near our door, I hear it first, not last. He didn't make dramatic vows. He showed me. He leaves space when I need it. He asks before he changes plans that touch our lives. He treats information like responsibility, not a weapon. He keeps choosing restraint as a practice, over and over, even when no one is watching. There are small moments that prove change better than any confession. One morning at school, Mason handed me a wrinkled drawing he'd been guarding in his backpack like a secret treasure. It was a house with a crooked roof, stick figure me, Lily with wild hair, and a fourth figure standing a little to the side. Mason's pencil lines were heavy where he pressed too hard, like he needed the page to believe him. The teacher talked through a simple update, and I realized I was smiling without scanning the parking lot first. The smile startled me. It felt like sunlight after a long storm, and I almost didn't trust it. Later that day, Lily spilled cereal on the table and giggled at the mess, then reached for a towel because she'd seen me do it. No flinch, no rehearsed apology, Just a child being clumsy and safe enough to laugh. I cleaned it up and felt my throat tighten. Not from sadness exactly, but from the shock of getting what I wanted all along. Not luxury, not revenge, ordinary. Ethan was in the kitchen, sleeves pushed up, trying to pack lunches with the focus of a man defusing a bomb. He cut sandwiches uneven and wrapped them too tight, then checked my face like he wanted to know if he'd done it wrong. He didn't become soft. He didn't become harmless. He became present. Later, he fixed a loose cabinet hinge without making a production out of it. The screwdriver in his hand looked stranger to me than a gun ever did. And still, the old world sends shadows. A few weeks ago, a sedan lingered at the end of our street longer than it needed to. It might have been a teenager waiting for a friend. It might have been nothing. But my body reacted before my mind could make excuses. My hands went cold, my hearing sharpened. I felt the old panic rise, bitter. Then I used the tools I have now. I checked curtains without making it obvious. I moved the kids away from windows with a casual rhythm. I sent a quiet message to our law-side contact, Agent Daniel Mercer, and forced myself to breathe slow. The sedan drove off. Later, Mercer sent a coded update that a small piece of the DeLuca mess twitched again in court. A hearing moved. A name resurfaced. Nothing that changed our immediate safety, but enough to remind me that danger doesn't vanish. It recedes. It waits. The difference now is that I don't collapse under that reminder. I don't swallow it alone. I communicate. I choose. I used to think being protected meant someone stronger stood in front of you. Now I know protection can turn into a cage if you aren't allowed to breathe, speak, or leave. I learned the difference between being protected and being owned the hard way, through fear and paper and quiet cruelty. I learned that survival reflex will borrow your choices if you let it. It will hand you a weapon and tell you it is the only language anyone respects. Quiet, I've learned, is something you build. You build it with locks that work and rules that make sense, with routines that remove predictability from the people who want to hurt you, with evidence filed and backed up, not hidden in shame, with boundaries stated clearly, then honored, with sleep that returns in minutes at first, then hours, then whole nights, with children who relearn what laughter sounds like. This morning, the coffee maker sputtered again, and I didn't jump. Mason's sock warmed by the heater, and I didn't treat it like an omen. I picked it up, folded it into the laundry basket, and felt the quiet settle around us like a blanket we earned. If you're listening and you've ever had to rebuild your life in small, stubborn pieces, I want you to know this. The first night you sleep through, the first boundary you hold, the first time you laugh without scanning the exits, those moments count. They are not small. They are the architecture of freedom. If this story stayed with you, please like, share, and comment a moment you reclaimed your life. Maybe it was a brave exit. Maybe it was a boundary. Maybe it was the first morning you made coffee and realized the quiet didn't feel like a trap anymore. Early winter light slipped through the blinds of our cramped kitchen and landed on the counter like it was testing whether it was allowed to stay. The coffee maker sputtered, clicked, and finally gave in. A small pile of cheap Christmas week wrapping paper still waited by the sink, torn at the edges because Mason insisted the crinkles meant it could be used again. One of his socks lay near the heater vent, half warmed, like even laundry had learned to hide in the safest corners. Calm feels unfamiliar, like a room I don't know how to stand in. The new normal is ordinary things. Brown lunch bags in a row. A grocery list with eggs, rice, dish soap, and Lily's cinnamon cereal. School forms with names that aren't ours, signed carefully because ink can be both disguise and shield. The heater hums. The fridge clicks. A floorboard creaks, and my shoulders lift anyway, because my body still expects danger to enter on soft feet. I didn't slide into this life. I negotiated it. I made Ethan Cross sit with me at the same table and listen while I laid out what I would not trade for safety. I was doing it for Mason and Lily, but also for the part of me that spent years confusing protection with possession. My first boundary was money. I control my own work and my own account. What I earn stays mine. Nothing in our home depends on me staying small. My second boundary was truth. No secrets about threats. No softened versions meant to keep me calm. If something moves in Ethan's old world, and it could brush our lives, I hear it early, not after. My third boundary was the kids. Mason and Lily never become leverage. Not in strategy, not in arguments, not in guilt. They are not bargaining chips, not proof, not collateral. Then I demanded an exit option that was real. A plan I could reach for with my own hands if I ever needed to leave. Ethan agreed, but agreement is cheap. What mattered was what he did on the mornings after. When a coded message comes in, He doesn't vanish into a corner like secrecy is a reflex. He tells me what matters in plain language, then asks what I want to do with it. He asks before he changes routes. He explains the why instead of assuming I should accept it because his name carries weight. He is still morally gray, still capable of cold math, but he practices restraint like a skill, and he practices respect like it costs him something. This morning, around 7:15 a.m., he fixed the loose cabinet hinge that kept squeaking, then wiped his hands on a dish towel like he belonged in a kitchen that smelled like coffee instead of salt air and adrenaline. He packed Lily's lunch wrong, too much fruit, and then paused, waiting for my correction instead of turning it into pride. He let me adjust it. He didn't make it a test. Mason watched him the way a child watches weather, not for entertainment, for survival. Then Mason handed him a marker for a school project without flinching. That tiny movement hit me harder than any courtroom win. Trust is not fireworks. Trust is a small hand offering a marker. The last step that made permanence feel possible without trapping me came in an envelope. It was a lease renewal in my name, signed and filed, not as a gift but as a statement. This house is not a cage with someone else's key. Alongside it, Ethan placed a second sealed envelope on the pantry shelf, behind the cereal, where only I would reach without thinking. Inside were copies of our protection documents, the number for our law-side ally, and the details of my exit plan, updated and simple. The envelope is mine. I know where it is. I can take it and go without begging anyone for permission. Holding those papers, relief rose in the same breath as grief. Grief for my sister Jessica, for how easily the world labeled her disappearance and kept moving. Grief for Claire, because Mason and Lily should still have their mother. Grief for my own lost years, for the old dream of safety that didn't require rules. We don't erase any of it. We just refuse to let the residue run the house. Family for me now is not a last name or a fantasy. It is chosen. It is protected by boundaries. It is built out of ordinary mornings. It is Mason's socks near the heater vent. It is Lily leaning into my shoulder while I brush her hair slow. It is Ethan washing his own coffee cup and asking before he makes decisions that touch our lives. It is the right to leave and the daily decision to stay. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Protection without consent is a cage. Love without choice is fear wearing perfume. Safety is something you co-create with honesty, boundaries, and the right to walk away. If you're listening and you've ever reclaimed your life, comment one boundary you're proud of, or one quiet win you earned when no one was clapping. And if this story meant something to you, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes the smallest choices are the ones that save us.